It begins with a whisper, an old photograph yellowed at the edges, found tucked deep inside a forgotten family Bible. A man and a woman stand too close, their faces uneasy, their eyes telling a story no scripture could hide. For years, the town pretended it was just another family portrait, but behind those faded smiles was a truth so unthinkable it was erased from records, left only to survive in rumor and hushed midnight conversations. This is not folklore. This is history. Hi everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit subscribe and tap the bell icon before this story pulls you in too deep. Tonight, I'll take you into a secret America was never meant to face. A forbidden bloodline, where a son did not grow up to simply be a man. He grew up to become his mother's husband. And from that union, a child was born. The story unraveled in fragments. Church records scratched out, birth certificates rewritten, graves left unmarked. What was left behind were questions. Who allowed this to happen? Why did no one intervene? And most disturbingly, what kind of child could come from a union like this? Historians have long debated the dark undercurrents of rural America, places where isolation fed secrecy, and secrecy bred horror. In one such town, hidden by miles of farmland and silence, the son was raised under the heavy hand of faith and tradition. His mother, herself a widow, held on to him with a closeness that began as protection, but transformed into something unspeakable. What outsiders may have seen as grief-driven attachment was, behind closed doors, a slow, steady weaving of forbidden intimacy. When whispers finally reached the neighbors, they said it could not be true, but the birth of the baby silenced their doubts. A child with features both familiar and strange, a child who embodied the deepest taboo. This is the beginning of America's forbidden bloodline, the M. who married his own mother. And as we peel back each layer, you'll see how the story was not only about one family's nightmare, but about what entire towns chose to hide. Every secret has a beginning, and this one began in the hushed aftermath of tragedy. The mother, widowed far too young, found herself with only one constant: her son. Neighbors said she kept him close, closer than most would consider proper. But grief makes strange companions. Her home, an old wooden farmhouse set against fields of rust-colored soil, became a place of silence, where the walls seemed to listen. At first, the townspeople excused her devotion. They said, "A boy without a father needs his mother's hand even more." But whispers grew when he no longer played with the other children, when he stopped calling her mama and began speaking to her as though she were his equal. There are fragments in the local archives, entries in church records where their names appear side by side without explanation. One chilling note, scrawled in the margin of a ledger, reads simply, "The boy no longer knows his place." As he matured, the lines blurred. Witnesses later recalled seeing them walking hand in hand through the market, not as mother and child, but as something else. And while others averted their eyes, they could not stop talking once backs were turned. One woman wrote in her diary, "The look between them was wrong, as though the world had tilted and they stood in its shadows." Isolation became their shield. They withdrew further, the farmhouse becoming both prison and sanctuary. He was no longer a boy in need of guidance. He was a man pressed too tightly into his mother's life. And when the inevitable happened, when she bore his child, silence became the town's only defense. People often imagine horror as something that lurks in forests, in abandoned asylums, or in ghost stories whispered at campfires. But here, it lived in plain sight, in a family that refused to acknowledge the boundaries that should never be crossed. The town, too afraid to confront it, chose instead to bury the truth beneath layers of denial. But a child cannot be buried so easily. That child became the living evidence of their forbidden union, the bloodline that should never have been, and once born, no silence could unmake it. This is not just a story about two people. It is about the birth of something the world was never meant to see. The child was born in silence. There are no official records of the birth, no proud announcements in the church bulletins, no family gathered to celebrate. Only whispers that traveled down dirt roads and through the cracks of closed doors. Some say the midwife who attended the birth refused to speak of what she saw, leaving town soon after. Others claim she was paid to keep her silence, though the look in her eyes whenever the family's name was mentioned suggested something deeper. Fear. The child did not resemble other children. The eyes were sharp, unsettling, too aware for an infant. Some claimed the mouth curled into expressions that should not belong to a newborn. Neighbors who glimpsed the baby swore that the resemblance between mother, son, and child was so uncanny it was almost unbearable to look at, like staring into a distorted mirror that kept folding back on itself. The townsfolk did not need explanations. They already knew, and so they looked away. But every time the child cried in the night, its voice carried farther than it should have, an echo that clawed into the ears of those nearby. Farmers told of hearing the baby's wails across wide fields, sounding less like an infant and more like something broken and ancient calling out from a well. For the boy, now a man, there was no shame. He carried the child as though it were his rightful heir, his creation. For the mother, witnesses described a haunted look, her eyes never meeting anyone else's. It was as though she had aged decades in months, her skin pale, her movements stiff, as though carrying the weight of something she could never undo. The town documented nothing, but fragments survive. In a forgotten box in the county archives lies a yellowed slip of paper with 5 words written in black ink. The child should not be. Who wrote it is unknown, but the phrasing suggests not only condemnation, but Dr. Yedao. This was no longer just a scandal. It was a living wound in the heart of the community, a secret passed in hushed tones, never daring to surface in daylight. Yet secrets like these do not stay hidden forever. They fester, they spread, and in time, they demand to be reckoned with. As the child grew, so did the unease. At first, it was subtle, an offbeat rhythm in the way he laughed, the way his eyes seemed to linger too long on people, as though studying them rather than simply looking. Children his age avoided him. Animals, too. Dogs that once wagged their tails at every passerby would growl when he neared. Horses shied away. Even the birds seemed to avoid nesting near the house where he lived. By the time the boy reached 5, townsfolk began to whisper openly. His features were uncanny, exaggerated echoes of both his father and his grandmother, who, of course, were one and the same bloodline. His cheekbones were sharp, his eyes misaligned in a way that suggested nature itself had grown tired of correcting the lineage. Some said he bore too much resemblance to the man who had fathered him, as if the cycle was tightening, compressing generations into one distorted face. Teachers at the small local school refused to keep him in class. One wrote in her notes, later discovered in an attic, "The boy unnerves the others. He speaks of things a child should not know." Another recorded a chilling detail. He would sometimes hum lullabies no one had taught him, ancient melodies in a tongue unfamiliar to anyone present. The boy was often seen wandering near the edge of the woods at night. His mother tried to keep him indoors, but he always found ways to slip out. Farmers claimed to see him standing among the trees, his face pale in the moonlight, whispering to no one, or perhaps to something only he could see. One farmer's account is particularly disturbing. He swore that the boy's shadow stretched unnaturally long, bending in ways the body did not. Still, the father refused to see anything wrong. He boasted that the boy was special, destined. Some claimed he spoke of a new line beginning with his child, one untouched by the rules of church or community. Others suggested his pride blinded him to the truth. The boy was not thriving, but changing, in ways no one could understand. The town carried the burden silently, terrified of what they were witnessing. They would not interfere, but they watched, and they remembered. For the boy was no longer just a secret. He was a warning. By the time the boy turned 10, the community had become divided. Those who dared to whisper of curses, and those too fearful to say anything at all. But silence does not erase unease. It only lets it fester. Strange events began to ripple through the small town. Livestock were found dead in their pens, not slaughtered, but as if drained of life, their eyes glassy, their bodies unmarked. Wells turned murky overnight. Children woke screaming, claiming to see a figure standing in their rooms, staring from the corners with crooked eyes and a crooked smile. Parents told them it was only a dream, but when they described the figure, their words matched perfectly with the features of the boy. At school, he lasted less than a week before being sent home permanently. Teachers whispered he was too aware. One even swore he had recited details about her deceased husband, things the boy could never have known. His mother wept silently at night, while his father called it a gift. But even he began to change. His once defiant voice grew harsher, more desperate, as though he too had begun to fear the very thing he had brought into the world. Neighbors reported hearing chants from the family's cabin after midnight, not the sounds of prayer, but of something older, more primal, words that rattled the walls and made even the dogs howl in distress. Sometimes the chanting would end in silence, and moments later, lights in nearby houses would flicker out, as though the boy's presence reached beyond his own home. The local church elders debated intervention, but no one was willing to act. "Leave them be," one pastor urged. "That bloodline has already cursed itself. Do not bring it upon the rest of us." And so, the family remained untouched, their isolation growing, their names spoken only in hushed tones. But the boy was no longer content to remain hidden. On more than one occasion, folk awoke to find him standing on their porches, watching them through the night, never knocking, never speaking, simply staring until the morning sun forced him to vanish. By then, no one could deny it. The child was not merely unusual. He was an omen. Something unnatural walked within him, and the town, though it prayed for distance, was already entangled in his shadow. By adolescence, the boy had become something that the town could no longer ignore. His presence stretched like a shadow across every doorstep, a silent reminder that what should never have been was now growing stronger. His body matured unevenly, his shoulders broadening while his face retained the unsettling asymmetry of childhood. An unsettling mask, half boy, half man. People said his smile never matched his eyes, and his eyes, they seemed far too old. The deaths began quietly. A farmer was found slumped in his barn. No wounds, no explanation. His animals circling nervously around his lifeless body. A week later, a schoolteacher collapsed mid-sermon, her pupils wide, her lips frozen in a silent scream. Whispers began. The boy was seen nearby. Some townsfolk believed he had inherited nothing but his father's sin, a curse from blood defiled. Others whispered he wasn't human at all, that he was born as a vessel for something darker. His father, once so defiant, now avoided him. At night, neighbors swore they heard shouting from the cabin, followed by the mother sobbing, followed by silence. The boy would appear outside by dawn, standing in the field with his head tilted skyward, as though listening to voices only he could hear. The mother's health deteriorated rapidly. Her skin grew pale, her body frail, her eyes hollowed out by fear she could not speak aloud. Some claimed she tried to run, others that she begged the townsfolk for help, but no one opened their doors. To aid her was to invite the curse upon themselves. They all knew it. They all chose to look away. The boy grew colder, crueler. He began walking into homes uninvited, standing in corners, running his hands along the walls as though memorizing them. Families fled their own houses just to escape his gaze. When confronted, he would only smile. A smile so uneven, so jagged, it seemed more like a wound than an expression. By then, the town had entered a state of quiet dread. No one confronted the family directly, but prayers were whispered daily. Candles burned late into the night. Everyone felt it. Something was building. Something that had been born from forbidden blood and sealed within the boy's existence. The man who had once boasted about creating a new beginning had instead forged a harbinger, and now that harbinger was preparing to reveal what he truly was. The end began on a night the town would never forget. A storm rolled across the valley, lightning illuminating the crooked cabin like the stage of a cursed play. The mother was seen wandering the road barefoot, her dress torn, her face streaked with tears. She begged, truly begged, for someone to take her away. No one did. Doors locked, curtains closed. Her cries vanished into the rain. Inside the cabin, the man faced his creation, his son, his child, his mistake. Neighbors swore they heard the shattering of glass, the bellow of a man's voice, and then an unnatural silence, the kind of silence that swallows everything whole. When lightning struck again, those watching from a distance said they saw the boy standing in the window, his face split in a crooked grin that seemed too wide, too jagged, too inhuman. By morning, the cabin was quiet, too quiet. When a group of men finally entered, they found no trace of the mother, no sign of the father. The only thing left was the boy, sitting at the table, staring, his hands folded neatly as if waiting for breakfast. On the walls were symbols carved deep into the wood, not letters, not words, shapes older than memory. Some swore they shifted when you looked too long. The men backed away, but before they could flee, the boy spoke. His voice was calm, steady, too steady for someone so young. He told them that he had never been their neighbor, never been their kin. He told them he had been waiting for this moment. And then, with that same untattling smile, he promised them that their children would carry his mark. None of the men ever spoke publicly of what they saw after that. Some left town within days. Others drank themselves to death. A few vanished entirely. The cabin was abandoned, swallowed by weeds and silence. But the story survived, whispered in hushed tones, passed through generations like a warning. Do not speak of the boy, do not speak of the mother, and never, ever return to the cabin. Even now, photographs remain hidden in dusty attics, records sealed in county offices, names stricken from church ledgers. But the scar remains, etched into American soil, a reminder that blood can create monsters, and some truths were never meant to be unearthed.